All right, let's get right into it. Today we're looking at a story that is just wild from start to finish. It's a masterclass in legal strategy, sure, but it's also about a client who you could say owed his lawyer his life and a pretty shocking betrayal of trust that was happening in the background the entire time.
So, to really get what makes this so dramatic, we have to start with a basic legal idea. I'm sure you've heard this term thrown around on TV shows, but what actually is attorney-client privilege?
At its core, it's pretty simple. It's that sacred seal of secrecy that lets you tell your lawyer everything, knowing it stays between you two. But here's the thing, and you really got to remember this part. The client, not the lawyer, is the one who holds that privilege. They're in the driver's seat. And that little detail, it is everything in this story.
Right. So, that leads us to the big question here. What on earth happens when the person who is supposed to be protected by this privilege is the one who decides to secretly just blow it all up? Well, that's exactly where this story goes completely off the rails. So here's how we're going to break this down. We'll start with the betrayal, then rewind to see the insane stakes. We're talking a life sentence. Then we'll get into the lawyer's brilliant, kind of crazy plan, see how it all played out in court, and then, boom, the secret tapes. It's going to be a ride.
Okay, so this story really revolves around two people. You've got the client, the famous Diddy, and then you have the man who pulled off a legal miracle for him, his defense lawyer, Mark Agnifilo. And for our purposes, Agnifilo is really the hero of this story, the architect of an absolutely incredible win. And to really get just how incredible his strategy was, you have to understand the position Diddy was in. I mean, the stakes could not have been higher. This wasn't some slap on the wrist. His whole life was hanging in the balance.
Yeah, you heard that right, a life sentence. Before this whole thing started, Diddy was staring down the very real possibility of never seeing the outside of a prison again. He literally owed his freedom, his entire future, to how this case turned out, and to the lawyer who was about to defend him.
So, you're the lawyer. Your client is facing life. What do? Well, Mark Agnifilo came up with this incredibly bold two-part strategy. He decided he wasn't just going to play defense. Oh no, he was going on the offense.
So here's the master plan in a nutshell. First, he was going to completely change the story the jury was hearing. And second, he was going to take the prosecution's single best piece of evidence and turn it into a total non-issue. Let's look at how he did it.
This right here was part one of the attack. Months, and I mean months, before the trial, Agnifilo started pushing this narrative. He was saying, look, this isn't really about a crime. This is about frustrated prosecutors who couldn't find anything wrong with his money, so they decided to dig into his personal life instead. He was painting Diddy not as a criminal, but as a target.
Now for part two of the plan, which honestly might be the most gutsy move of all. Agnifilo knew the prosecution had what they thought was their silver bullet, their smoking gun, but instead of trying to hide from it, he decided to run straight at it and make it seem ridiculous.
He said this in a documentary way before the trial, and people went nuts. They thought he was being totally disrespectful, just mocking serious evidence. But what they didn't get was that Agnifilo was playing the long game. He was already starting to defuse the prosecution's biggest weapon in the public's mind, long before a jury was even picked.
And all of that early work was just setting the table for the main event, the courtroom. This is where his entire strategy was going to come together during his closing arguments. It was pure legal theater.
And this is so key. The evidence itself never changed. 1,000 bottles of baby oil is 1,000 bottles of baby oil. What changed was the story wrapped around it. For the prosecution, it was this sinister, damning piece of evidence. For Agnifilo, well, he was about to turn it into a punchline.
And there it is. That's the line he delivered to the jury in his closing argument. Can you just imagine? He basically took the prosecution's entire case, all their manpower and resources, and framed it as this colossal, ridiculous waste of time over some baby oil. He made their greatest strength look utterly foolish.
And that was it. That was the moment. The jury laughed out loud. And when they laughed, Agnifilo knew he'd done it. He'd won. Because that laughter meant they saw the whole thing as absurd, just like he wanted them to. The trial was over right then and there. The official verdict just made it formal. Not guilty on all the serious charges. It was an absolutely stunning victory. Mark Agnifilo had won a case that, by all accounts, looked unwinnable. But this is where the story takes that final, dark turn.
Because you see, while Agnifilo was pulling off this legal masterpiece, something else was going on, something he had no idea about, something that just completely shatters the foundation of trust between a lawyer and their client. It was time for the secret tapes to surface.
Now, this is Mark Agnifilo on the phone, having a brutally honest, high-stress conversation with his client during the trial prep. It's the kind of talk lawyers have to have. The problem? He had no idea he was being recorded.
And there's the betrayal. Diddy had a camera crew following him around, documenting his life for a project. And they were recording these private, legally privileged phone calls. Agnifilo is speaking his mind, thinking he's in a cone of silence, but he's actually being taped by the very team he's trying to save.
I mean, just let that sink in for a second. The client whose freedom was just won by this lawyer's incredible performance had allowed that same lawyer's most private and candid moments to be recorded and later exposed. It's a complete violation of the trust that their entire relationship is built on.
In this whole saga, it really makes you take a step back and think. This goes way beyond just one court case. It touches on these huge ideas of loyalty, of trust, of what we owe the people who fight for us.
So we'll leave you with this question to chew on. In this world of immense fame, fortune, and pressure, what is loyalty really worth? This case is an amazing story of legal genius, for sure. But it's also a pretty stark warning about what can happen to trust when the cameras are always on. It really makes you wonder, what's the true price of loyalty?